a knock on the door just past midnight. Anthony Davidson told his wife to step back out of the hallway. They'd been threatened that day. When he slowly opened the door, she saw the barrel of a gun and heard the roar of gunshots. Anthony fought and fell mortally wounded, but he had injured the killer as well. The killer had dropped the gun and fled. The British Army recovered the weapon and logged 2 cars escaping the scene. A red Mini and a black saloon. Secret British Army files, which I have tracked and fought for over 9 years, prove that the Loyalist killer's commander, one of the best known and most senior paramilitary commanders of the conflict, asked the British Army for the return of the .45 calibre revolver, which had been lost during the incident, just days after Anthony's murder. Not only did this Loyalist admit to British military intelligence that his paramilitary gang murdered Anthony and several other civilians around the same time, but also surrendered the names of a second command whose car was used and the injured killer who was treated in a hospital bed close to Anthony's as he lay dying. The name of the informant to British military intelligence is well known in Northern Ireland, as he became the supreme commander of the Ulster Defence Association, the largest paramilitary group throughout the recent conflict in Ireland and Britain. The British Army agent was Andy Tyrie. The British Armed Forces did not prosecute Tyrie or the killers he named. Anthony's family were never given justice or truth until this very day. My name is Kieran McArch. I'm a writer and founder of the charity Paper Trail Legacy Archive Research that supports victims and survivors of the conflict. This is my short video on Andy Tyrie, the anatomy of collusion and the murder of Anthony Davidson. July 1972 was the bloodiest month of the bloodiest year of the most recent conflict in Ireland and Britain, which lasted over 30 years. Around 90 lost lives and hundreds injured, many with life-changing injuries. Thousands were traumatised. All sides were guilty of the carnage in July 1972. The Springfield Road area of West Belfast was particularly dangerous for all communities, and Clovelly Street was like a street under siege. Just days before and nearby, the British Army's King's Regiment had murdered 5 during the Spring Hill Massacre. Among the dead were teenagers, including a schoolgirl, a family man and the local priest. My grandmother's teenage nephew was among those murdered too. 2 Protestant civilians were shot dead by Republicans whilst trying to defend property from bomb attacks. It was soon after one of these murders that Anthony Davidson was warned, "We will get all you Fenians out of the street and your husband will be the first to go." It was a warning the family took seriously too, as the local Loyalist paramilitaries had kidnapped Catholic civilians that month from their cars at roadblocks, even in daylight. Some of those Catholic civilians were tortured and murdered, their bodies dumped in waste ground. Local residents were afraid that Loyalist paramilitaries were being given a free hand to terrorise their community. Following my discovery of Andy Tyrie's collusion with British military intelligence in these files, we now know that they were right to be afraid. In early July, King's Regiment commanders contacted Tyrie and asked him to stop his men kidnapping and attempting to murder civilians on the Springfield Road, as they needed to keep the main road open during the day. The day after their Spring Hill Massacre, the King's Regiment caught a Loyalist with a gun but released him to Tyrie on the advice of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, rather than prosecuting him. When the Loyalist paramilitaries came for Anthony and he was asked through the door who was it, they gave the name of a friend, but he didn't recognise the voice. And that's when Anthony, a young father, a member of the Catholic Ex-Servicemen's Association, told Annie to move out of the hallway as he opened the door slowly. After the shots and the fight, Anthony was hit in the head and crumpled to the ground. His attacker too was injured and dropped a .45 calibre pistol. A neighbour told police he saw the killer running from the doorway and trying to jump into a moving car, but the car kept going. Details of the shooting hit the British Army logs that I discovered almost immediately. At 18 minutes past midnight, the 1st Battalion King's Regiment recorded shooting heard Clovelly Street, 1 man believed killed, security forces not involved, RUC and King's Regiment investigating. Anthony at this time is clinging on to life. 2 minutes later, the log recorded a message from the Royal Military Police. Ambulance control reports shooting Forth River Road, brackets Clovelly Street, 1:15 midnight, ambulance sent. Clovelly Street had a pen lying through the type. The King's Regiment recovered the killer's weapon and recorded details of the 2 cars involved at 1:45 in the morning. Mr. A. Davidson, seriously ill, shot at doorstep of 48 by gunman who dropped a 45 calibre pistol. Recovered, 2 cars involved, red Mini, black saloon, car registration redacted, false plates. That's a lot of crucial evidence within half an hour. Anthony was known to the King's Regiment too. As a member of the Catholic Ex-Servicemen's Association, he was in contact with them as a local resident who was keeping an eye out in the area for trouble. But that made him a target for Loyalist paramilitaries and the British state. The Evening Herald reported he had only secured a defensive weapon the day before due to numerous threats over the previous weeks. Now, whether he had fired it or jostled the attacker's gun, the result was the same. The Loyalist was shot and dropped his gun as he fled. At 5:1, a 39-year-old Protestant was admitted to Royal Victoria Hospital with a gunshot wound to the shoulder, alleging that a man had shot him from a passing car on Forth River Road, about a mile away. This man's name and address is redacted, but British Army unit logs across 39 Brigades patch don't record gunfire there. I believe that this was a cover story given to the hospital staff and to the British Army there to explain a shooting injury. At 2:15, King's Regiment recorded that this man, again his name is redacted, was found to have in his possession 6 45 calibre bullets and 1 45 calibre dum-dum round. RVH, Royal Victoria Hospital Guard, has them. Tennant Street RUC will remove the rounds. Davidson, last rites, book, telephone numbers. This is recorded in the same serial, which tells anyone with experience in reading these logs that the 2 pieces of information are connected. Yes, the message comes from the same regiment at RVH, but if it was separate pieces of information relating to separate incidents, they would be recorded in separate serials. British Army commanders had connected the injured Protestant, his 45 calibre bullets, the 45 calibre murder weapon left at the scene of Anthony's shooting at Clovelly Street within hours. It was a murder weapon too by then, as the next serial of the log 12 minutes later, at 27 minutes past 2 in the morning, recorded Davidson, now dead. The British Army and RUC knew who had killed Anthony by then. They had the injured culprit in a hospital bed nearby and had found the 45 calibre bullets on him. When Andy Tyrie boasted about Anthony's murder and the murder of others in the area and gave the name of men involved in Anthony's murder, he was just confirming what the British Armed Forces already knew. The British Army recorded this casual collusion with the leader of the UDA less than a week later in an intelligence summary and transmitted it all the way up to British military and RUC headquarters. Under Protestant activities, British military intelligence writes, after the death of Anthony Davidson, name redacted and one of a number of brothers involved in the IRA, Andy Tyrie made no secret of the fact that his company had been responsible. His second in command, whose name is redacted here, owned the car which was used. Tyrie asked for the 45 calibre revolver back, which had been lost during the incident, and a member of A Company, whose name, age and address is redacted, was admitted to hospital shortly after the incident. Tyrie stated that Davidson was going to be detained for interrogation, but that something had gone wrong and shots were exchanged. Tyrie admitted responsibility. He identified a car owned by a second in command. He touted on a wounded A Company man admitted to hospital shortly after the incident, and he asked for the murder weapon back. The British Army already had the 45 calibre in its possession, logged 2 cars, and hours after the shooting, its guard lifted 6 45 calibre bullets and 1 45 calibre dum-dum round from the wounded killer at the RVH. The casual collusion between Andy Tyrie and the British Army in the intelligence summary just supported what the British state already knew. Now, this information was not locked in a drawer. It was distributed to every British Army regiment stationed in Northern Ireland, each British Army Brigade headquarters, to Headquarters Northern Ireland, to British Intelligence, RUC Special Branch, its police commander, and RUC Police Headquarters NOC. Then again, the British military files that I discovered prove that the state already knew who was who in A Company from Tyrie down, with names, ages and addresses of his UDA officers and foot soldiers unredacted. But the mix was already in, and the Loyalist killers were allowed to go free. The sectarian assassinations and romper room murders continued, and at the time only Irish Catholics were interned without charge, despite what the British state knew what Loyalist paramilitary groups were doing. These men murdered many more over the following decades, but the British state did not prescribe the UDA until 1992. But what about the injured killer? There was only one other shooting victim that was being treated at the same time as Anthony after a shooting around 1:15 midnight. The Royal Victoria Hospital then admitted a 39-year-old Protestant with a gunshot wound to the shoulder. He said he'd been hit by a shot from a passing car on Forth River Road. Around 1:30, RUC comms repeated that he'd been shot in a drive-by. No British Army units recorded even hearing shots at Forth River. I checked 1 Kings, the 1st Battalion of Royal Regiment of Wales and 4-5 Commando. No contact, no shots recorded anywhere near Forth River. The only confirmed gunfire still sat at Clevelly Street, where the .45 calibre had already been lifted and 2 getaway vehicles logged. 4-5 Commando retrospectively recorded the following morning in the situation report, name and address of person redacted, was walking in the Forth River Road when he was shot from a passing car. He had in his possession 6 .45 rounds and 1 .45 dum-dum. Meanwhile, the physical chain of evidence was intact. The .45 calibre from Clevelly, the .45 calibre rounds in the pocket of a man who says he was a mile away when shot, but no British Army units heard any gunshots there. Ballistics from his bullet wound and ballistics from the body of Anthony Davidson in a bed nearby. Vehicle records would have confirmed the involvement of Tyrie's right-hand man, and this could be checked with living witnesses. But then again, all of this was then confirmed by Andy Tyrie anyway, but the British state let Tyrie and his killers go free. The injured killer's name is redacted in these files, but I scoured the newspapers from the period and discovered that the Belfast Telegraph gave the name of a man who was allegedly shot from a passing car on Forth River Road. The British Military Archives recorded that this man's age was 39, so if he was still living, he would be around about 92 years of age now. Our contact said that he was alive when we last checked 3 years ago, and I passed this investigation to Anthony's family. I have checked PRONI, Public Records Office, for any proof of convictions for this murder or even possession of illegal ammunition, but there are no records that he was charged or convicted in Belfast Commission files or subsequent newspaper archives. A man with the same name and of the same age in 1983, 50, was arrested and charged on the word of so-called Supergrass loyalist John Gibson. Gibson alleges that he was with the man at a meeting in a Loyalist club in 1972 when a .45 calibre, 9mm and Mauser handguns and rifles were produced. The man was given bail after a detective told the court he was satisfied he had not been involved in crime since 1972. The RUC stood in his defence but did not tell the judge that in 1972 the British Army and RUC had connected this man to the murder of Anthony Davidson. The charges were then dropped in 1985 when Gibson retracted his statements. The suspect got away with murder yet again. The day after Anthony's murder, 1 Kings reported that 31 Catholic families were going to move out of Clevelly Street as they were intimidated. 12 families had already gone by 1:15 and another 4 were planned to go as soon as they could. The Belfast Telegraph reported on 24th of July that 30 families had fled. A spokesman for the families in Clevelly Street was quoted, "One man from our street was shot dead last week. An attempt was made on the life of another man and a bullet was pushed through the letterbox of another of our neighbours. On top of that, we were all told we had half an hour to get out." The Belfast Telegraph asked the RUC about the intimidation, and a police spokesman is quoted as saying, "Several complaints alleging intimidation have been received by the police and they are being investigated." We now know from these files that the police and British Army had known that the killer of Anthony Davidson was in a hospital bed close to him, had found bullets on the suspect, and his UDA commander, Andy Tyrie, had confirmed that he was the killer. The British Army and RUC let him, Andy Tyrie, and his second in command go free. These historic files prove that knowledge of Tyrie's involvement in terrible murders, including Anthony's, went to the top of the British military, government and RUC. During the most violent month of the conflict, when all sides murdered scores and injured hundreds, Tyrie's UDA gang was guilty of some of the most gruesome killings of the conflict, including kidnapping and torture. He was in constant contact with the British Armed Forces in the secret British Army logs that I've discovered. Britain then had an agent at the top of the UDA for 15 years and ran the largest paramilitary group in the so-called United Kingdom. During Tyrie's tenure as Supreme Commander, his UDA murdered hundreds of Irish Catholic civilians, but Britain did not prescribe it until 1992. During his command, Tyrie even helped to cripple Northern Ireland during the Ulster Workers' Council strike and bring down the Power Sharing Assembly at Stormont. Now, we know that most of the UDA's arms came from the British Army or intelligence services, but these files give us a better understanding of the anatomy of British state collusion and murder on the streets of Belfast from the start of the conflict. Whilst we can be assured that Britain would not have allowed a similar paramilitary gang to murder hundreds of citizens in Cardiff, London or Edinburgh, Britain armed and trained Tyrie and the UDA to commit these heinous crimes in Belfast. We were, and we remain, a place apart as far as the British state is concerned.